You think we can find the flower? That sounds like a good idea.
Karzeda spoke haltingly, as if remembering the times he shared with his beloved friend. She'd always loved flowers. Tempil was a land forged by its mines, and its climate wasn't suitable for flowers. But that wasn't going to stop her. As if that thread of memory had unspooled another, Karzeda said that his friend mentioned having a secret flower garden. But she hadn't told him the location, so he wasn't sure where to begin looking.
Sometimes she'd head out to a forest near Folka. If the garden's anywhere, it's probably somewhere in there.
It might be a long shot, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I drained the last of my glass. We stepped out of the tavern. The rain had stopped. The air was humid, but the sun was a welcome sight after the rain. I squinted up at the brilliant blue sky. There, arcing over the forest, was a large rainbow.
Once upon a time, in a land far away, there was a lone swordsman famed for his two-sword style. He became a legend after fighting over 10,000 battles, and the mere sound of his name struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. Whenever he appeared in town, ne'er-do-wells were said to scramble away like spiders fleeing the light. Prospective fighters began to seek out the swordsman, and thus he gained quite the following of disciples. Amongst them, some were so strong they could crush warships with a single strike. One could do worse when choosing students of the martial arts. So the master abandoned the battlefield for the mountains, where he could train his beloved disciples in peace. There was one disciple who quickly stood leagues above the rest. It took her only a matter of days to master the most complicated techniques. She grew at an astonishing rate into one of the most powerful fighters the master had ever seen. But more impressive than her wits or her aptitude was the strength of her conviction. Every day, the top disciple begged for harder training, and the master was willing to reward her passion with the very depths of his knowledge. And that's why... Oh, skies help me. That's why when the master found out his top disciple had betrayed him, he was filled with anguish. She went rogue, forcing some of the other disciples to do her bidding. Eventually, the master caught up with her, and they fought a deadly battle. When the dust settled, the top disciple's sword arm hung limp and unusable. It was a bittersweet victory, as the master knew what must come next. He readied his blade, preparing to release her to the afterlife. But he couldn't force himself to make the cut. Not after all he had poured into this girl. Not after failing her so. Thus, he laid down his weapon and promised to live his remaining days in penance and regret. Oh, how our good intentions cloud even the most prescient vision. Having thrown away his name, his blade, and his path, he set out back into the world, but this time swearing no one would suffer from his tutelage again. Time passed, and the swordsman found himself atop a different mountain, where he learned he had a knack for fishing. Suited him just fine. Bass for breakfast, salmon for supper, and naps in between. Yep, it suited him just fine. It was the quiet, healing life of a hermit. Sometimes, when he needed supplies, he would go down to the village and train the locals in a little sword work. That made his coin purse jingle again. But this peace wasn't to last for the swordsman. He discovered his top disciple was back to her wicked ways, and, sword in hand, he vowed to conclude her story for good. This was his true purpose for traveling with the crew, though the young captain never suspected the little Harvan fisherman was harboring such a dark secret. The former disciple's latest victim had been a simple man from a remote mountain area, cut down, somehow without the use of her sword. A real shame that one more innocent life lost before its time. The swordsman asked the crew to make haste to the village. When he saw the murdered man's corpse, such was the carnage that he could barely keep from averting his eyes. It was his weakness, his cowardice, that cost this poor man's life. But this time, instead of wallowing in pity, he would don his white uniform of old and atone. He called it his burial garb, and it represented his fearlessness on the battlefield. If he were dressed to meet death face to face, what more could his foes do to intimidate him? Of course, his crewmates tried to reason with him, concerned he might throw his life away to make up for the wrongdoing of another. But the Swordmaster was determined. He had vowed to stop his former disciple, whatever risk that entailed. So, when finally the moment of reckoning had come, the Master gripped his blade, ready to strike down his favored pupil. Before he could do the deed, however, his resolve crumbled. His emotions were too strong, dulling his senses and causing him to lose the match. The Master's former youngest disciple, with his two newest pupils watching from the sidelines, rushed to aid him. Ironically, it was the youngest disciple who struck down the fiend in place of the Master. The swordsman was lost in grief, but his newfound champion told him this was for the best. After all, such an old life deserved the rest of its days to be spent in peace. After joining up with the crew, I've had some helter-skelter days, let me tell you. So when we arrived in Zega Grande, I knew I needed to get myself some fishing done. Reset the old noggin. Found a nice quiet pond and dropped my line. Bless me taters. Must have been hours past with no bite. Finally, I decided to pull up my rod and check if the bait was still hardy. But there weren't no baits, no hook, and no fish. Only a lonely little bobber remained on the line. Right, well, what about me traps? I was halfway through the search when I realized, blast, I left them in the lodge. What a day, what a day. But it was too late in the noon to go back for them, and I had other business to attend to, like getting back to the pond and staring out at the clear water. In that moment of stillness, the fishies swam out of their hiding spots. There were big ones and little ones, and the whole school of them reminded me of my teaching days. Each of my disciples was unique in their own right. Had me some slow learners and some fast ones, some goody two-shoes and some real punks. I learned me some good lessons from those kids. My top student, Grace, never wavered in her particular sense of justice. and her commitment to her training was ironclad. What a waste. Rains, my youngest pupil, lost his way for decades after leaving my tutelage, but he ended up killing Grace in my stead. He was selfless, thinking only of his master. They say the master extracts potential from the student, but I fear I've ruined more young lives than I've helped. Makes a fisherman wonder how they all would have turned out had he just kept well enough to himself. I turned Grace into a monster. Not a day goes by I don't regret honing her skills. Unfortunately, she had the gift and the gumption to go far, and I exhausted all my knowledge on her. If only I had focused more on the why of my teachings rather than the what. Huh? I swore I felt a nibble at my rod, but when I pulled it up, there was nothing to be found. That's when I remembered I still hadn't hooked or baited the line. That was odd. I was getting antsy. Maybe it was because I forgot the traps, but I couldn't relax just sitting there anymore. I decided to pack up and head back into town. You see, the mind is like a creek. You want to keep it healthy. You gotta keep the waters from stagnating. But churn them too much, and you risk losing all your fish. I decided to head to Sierra's shack and replace some fishing gear, hopefully restoring my brain pond in the process. But just as I was dipping my toes into the placid waters of the lures and bait, I heard a rustle from behind. And to my surprise, they were my crewmates, picking up a package. Said they were bored at the inn and asked if they could come fishing with me. Youngsters so bored they wanted to go fishing? First time for everything, huh? While I was hammering out the finer points of fly casting with the captain, Sierra Carte piped up. Said she'd come across a pretty tasty rumor.
Yep, apparently there's a legendary fisherman in this skydom that people have started calling the Fisher God.
I'd heard rumors like this one before, and they always stank like fish guts. Catching 10 fish with one cast, netting a whole consortium of crabs. By yourself? Gah! If I had a fin for every story like this, I'd be a pretty scary sea monster by now. Then again, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued. There's a scale of truth to every story, so there must be a reason they call this person the Fisher God. Guess you might say my interest was piqued. Because if this fella were half as good as me, he'd make a mighty fine rival. And maybe that's just what I needed.
You wouldn't leave your sister behind. Need a pro, eh? After some consideration, I decided I would test my mettle against this so-called Fisher God. The captain, Lyria, and Vern wanted to help out too. I asked around town where I might find such a rival, but he proved to be as mythical as his title suggested. Rumor had it that he appeared at ponds, peaks, and valleys. The others garnered about the same information, which only further piqued my interest. No matter who we asked, we could not catch the proverbial tail of the Fisher God. All we learned was that he was skilled, able to catch 10 fish with one cast, yada yada, and any new species he caught would be named after him, meaning there were lots of little demigods swimming around now. With only tales of his escapades to feed us and no concrete info, we grew weary. You can't sustain a healthy rivalry on rumor, after all. We needed to change our approach and re-examine the facts. All of the stories were about places he visited, meaning he'd never been spotted in town. With that in mind, we enlisted Sierra Carte to speed up the investigation. Sure enough, after a few days' time, she gave us a map dotted like it had the chickenpox. There were stamps on ponds and lakes, glaciers and volcanoes, and even a poisonous swamp. All of them locations where he'd been spotted. So the old fart got around, did he? Good to know he had an adventurous streak. After staring at the map for a while, I realized there was one place conspicuously without a stamp. It was the most dangerous island of all, known for the molten lava covering its surface. Going off my hunch, Sierra Carte did a little more digging around, and we learned a man with a fishing rod chartered a ship there a few days ago. The chase was on. So, who's ready to shove off? Now, where's this Fisher God?
We're monsters!
That's no good. Did we wake the spirit to this land? Ha! Try to keep up! Where you looking? Ever tried fighting a shadow?
Reap what you sow.
Are you really gonna fish in a dangerous place like this?
Of course! We're not dealing with your average angler here. This is a Fisher God raptor. Now, he should have left supplies or traps or something. Keep your eyes peeled for him.
Okay, but we better be careful while we search.
Just testing you, lad! Guys! Batter up!
You got it.
My head slipped! Oh, yeah!
Appreciate you. Now this is firepower.
It's curtain for ya!
Ah! Don't scare me like that!
Now, if I were a Fisher God, this is probably the bait I'd use. Just a hunch, though. Careful now! Those spirits look angry!
Those are the ones that explode if you beat them too hard. There is but float. Our castaway! Foam on the sea. Infinite wonder! Rain of fury!
Over here, you mercy maid!
Bring the limit!
Keep it together.
Like idea?
You reap what you sow.
Plays like a fiddle!
Wind in the fields. Night falls. We've come pretty far. This heat is killing me.
Just a matter of time before we're there. Now hop to it.
Looks like somebody came through here, and they were collecting magma worms.
Whoa! I see somebody! Maybe it's the Fisher God!
Very well could be. Give him a hello and see what's up.
Hey there! Can we talk a minute? Hey, mister! What the heck are you doing out here?
What's it look like? I'm fishing.
What fish? You might catch a few rocks if anything at all.
We fish, therefore they are. It's the deepest waters what hide the greatest prizes.
The proverb left his lips like a right prophet. This had to be our Fisher God.
I still don't get how fish could survive in lava.
And that's your problem.
His answer was cryptic, but it had its own logic. The captain, Lyria, and Vern cocked their heads to the side in confusion. Clear water or molten rock? Cast the rod and catch the fish.
Truer words were never spoken, friend.
Guess I've learned me something over the years. Those unblinking eyes, that unrelenting hunger for the catch. His tools were top-notch. More importantly, however, he had the aura of a man born to hunt the seas. But I didn't come to admire him. May we presume you are the Fisher God?
And to what do I owe the accusation?
What do you say to a little fish-off betwixt the two of us?
Ah, now there's a song to my ears. It would be my honor.
And thus, the net was cast.
Good day.
We fish, therefore they are. It was a profound statement. Hang your line thinking you won't catch anything, and you won't notice even the heftiest bite. Determination was the most essential tool in the old tackle box. But then again, we were sat up next to a lava lake, and I would need more than simple chutzpah to pull a fish out of there. Luckily, I had me secret weapons.
Someone came prepared.
Beautiful, ain't they? I strung a special hook, carved from a flame worm's tooth, to a special line, spun from its mane. Been looking forward to the day I can bust out these bad boys.
Whoa! You're really going to do this?
The captain, Vern, and Lyria were stunned as I cast my rod into the lava.
Just what the heck are you old-timers expecting to catch?
Vern's voice was filled with confusion, but wasn't a moment longer when we made a believer out of him. Oh, a bite!
Me too!
The Fisher God and I started pulling up catch after catch. It seemed like we both brought determination to spare. But the fish living inside the lava weren't no slouches neither. They were covered in armor like scales, and when we pulled them ashore, their flopping sent liquid death flying in every direction. Was kind of funny. So there we were, equally matched, neither side willing to back down. As our piles of molten fish gradually turned to hills, the captain, Lyria, and Vern were dumbstruck. Soon enough, our swordbacks told us it was time for a gentleman's break, and we decided to tally our scores. We counted each fish as we threw them back into the lava. Their physiology meant they couldn't be cooked.
Don't want no sulfur in my sushi anyway. But they sprang back alive as soon as they were returned to their familiar warmth.
Should have known you'd be a shark on the rod.
Just trying to keep up. It was a rare thing to meet your match. The smiles on our faces were proof of that. Vern flew up to us.
Do all old dudes fish like that? If you went for broke, I wonder who would come out on top.
The Fisher God and I locked eyes. We could feel the sparks flying.
Sounds like the gauntlet's been thrown.
Agreed. We've had enough of a warm-up.
Then you won't mind if we up the ante, huh?
He told us about a few local legendary fish that had eluded capture for years. Reminded me of the noble bonito from good old Fanta Grande. We agreed the winner would be the first to trap one of them fabled guppies. The prospect sent lightning through me body. The old spark was coming back.
Please come again.